Welcome to the Find Your Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Aleks, a breathwork facilitator, a functional nutrition guide, and the founder of Detox House, which is your portal for nervous system regulation and stress management. Detox House exists to help you stop living in fight or flight. It helps you break stress patterns. It helps you build more capacity, more resilience so that you can find freedom and experience more joy in your life. This podcast will bring you conversations around neuroscience, around stress management, nervous system regulation, brain rewiring, all the things that will help get us out of survival mode and find our freedom. By listening to this podcast, you are unlocking an entirely new level of self. And I am so excited for all of us to experience that new version of you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Find Your Freedom podcast with Detox House. I'm Aleks, your host, and so happy to be here with you all talking about today's episode. It's been one that's been on my mind for a while, and I just didn't know the exact way I was going to frame it or do it, and I feel like it all kind of came together while I was on my flight to New York last week. I always have the best clarity up in the clouds, so it's a good time for me to write, to outline, to get my thoughts out on paper. I really wanted to talk about this one because it's definitely been something that I've been revisiting in real time as well, and I love to do that with you guys. I love to share what I'm revisiting and what I'm working through as far as nervous system goes and survival patterns and all of that. This is a pretty big one for everyone right now too, and that is trusting ourselves, especially after we've made a mistake. So if you've felt that you've ever made a decision that shook your trust in yourself, maybe you ignored a red flag, maybe you stayed too long, maybe you became friends with somebody that you knew you shouldn't have from the get-go, and then you just didn't listen to your intuition. Or maybe, you trusted the wrong person, made a business mistake, missed something you feel like you should have known. And afterward, the hardest part wasn't even the mistake itself. It wasn't even like, okay, fine, I turned down that job and I really should have taken it. But it was the voice in your head saying, how did I not see that? Why did I do that? Can I even trust myself anymore? And even if we consciously say, yeah, of course I trust myself, I make so many other good decisions, if we don't address the subconscious belief that we can't trust ourselves underneath it all, that's when we get in trouble. And I feel like a lot of us have that running in our subconscious, even if it's not rational, right? Again, a lot of the nervous system work is not rational. It's not in the head, it lives in the body. And so we might wake up and say to ourselves, like, yeah, of course I make good decisions, but our brains need proof that we do. And we really need to wire that into our nervous system, especially after we've made a significant quote unquote mistake where we're now in a place where you're like, I can't trust myself with dating, with relationships. I can't trust myself to make a good business decision. If that has ever been a thought for you, if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, maybe I feel this way. Yes, this resonates, then this episode is for you. Before we get started, I did want to set the tone for this episode as well, in that mistakes are not a bad thing. So before we even go there, this is not an episode about shaming or blaming us for making mistakes. It's really about finding the psychological safety in them, because there is a very strong body of research supporting the idea that even in organizational psychology, and I know a lot of you listening over here are high performers, high achievers, you're ambitious, you're executives, you're CEOs, you're running teams. This is super, super important. In organizational psychology, there is a strong body of research that supports that the highest performing teams, the best performing teams, are not the ones that make fewer mistakes. They actually make more mistakes. Because there's no fear of mistake. They admit mistakes. They ask questions. They disagree. They take risks without fear of humiliation and punishment. Those are the best teams. So if the best teams are doing that, we need to, in my opinion, be doing that in a personal setting as well. So not only in an organizational setting, and I'll link to that research here, by the way, it's from Harvard Business School, but not only should we be one, if you're a leader listening to this episode, definitely we'll table that and think about that as a leader. But this episode is about, and again, this episode should help you in terms of how you think about that. But this episode is really about creating that psychological safety for all of us to be okay with taking risk, okay with, speaking up, making mistakes. And I'll define what a mistake is in a second, because I think that's super, super important too. But creating this environment where there's no shame over this, and creating an environment where you can trust yourself to keep going out there. So despite how many times you've gotten heartbroken, yes, we should learn from our mistakes, but also there's nuances here in making sure that you can still trust yourself while you learn from it. Because I know a lot of people, the pendulum swings the opposite direction, where they're just like, well, I'm just not going to do that anymore because I'm just not good at it, or I can't trust myself. And so I really want to ground us here in this episode that the goal here is to remember your perfection, remember how perfect you are, and find the beauty in the quote unquote mistakes that you've made. And also, I'll give you tips on how to build trust again, because again, if you have that running in the background in your nervous system, that it's not safe to make decisions anymore, or it's not safe to trust yourself anymore because you've made too many bad mistakes, that is detrimental to you. And we want to rewire that while still being able to learn from our mistakes and not keep making the same ones, but also learn to trust ourselves and trust our intuition and trust our decision-making abilities, especially if we are aligned when we're making those decisions. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means, what that looks like. So before we even go there, let's define what I mean by mistake, because that is very, very important to ground this conversation. I want to be very clear as to the definition of mistake that we're using in this episode. Mistakes are not when we cause intentional harm to somebody. Mistakes are not deception. It's not like I lied, that was a mistake. That's not it. Mistakes are not negligence, and they're not manipulation. So we are not talking about those things when we are talking about a mistake. When we use the word mistake, quote unquote mistake, it is a situation where you believed you were doing the right thing or you were making a right decision, and more information came about where you don't feel like that is true anymore. So mistakes often involve judgment, where you sat there and you judged a situation, you judged a person, and you felt like you were judging correctly. There was no manipulation, no deception, no negligence, no intentional harm. I just want to make that very, very clear. We could talk about that in another episode, but this episode is about a situation where you misjudged something, where there was a failure in diagnosis, there was a failure in decision making, or there was a failure in planning. And I use the word failure, but that's your perception, that you're perceiving that there was a failure. And again, that's very important, because I'm not saying that there was, but our system, our nervous system, our brain, our subconscious believes that there was a failure. You failed in something. You failed in planning, you failed in diagnosing something, and you failed in decision making. And therefore, you are deeming this thing a mistake. Whether, again, you misjudged a person and now you feel sad that you misjudged a person, or you made a decision based on limited information, or based on, your past experience, or based on some other thing. You lacked information, you misinterpreted something, your prediction was incorrect because you were in an emotional state, or you have PTSD from a certain situation. So I'll actually give an example of a mistake. I mean, I've made plenty of mistakes. I have lots of examples to give here. So I'll mention one of my mistakes here for reference, and we can use this mistake in this episode as we walk through the different phases and the different considerations. So I deem this one of the quote unquote biggest career mistakes of my life. I was living in San Francisco. This is now 10 years ago. And I was working for a company called Pop Sugar, Shop Style. Was working for a fantastic CEO, Brian Sugar, who's now an investor. He was an incredible leader, wonderful mentor. I learned so much from him. And I always felt like he had my back, and it was just such a wonderful rapport. And at the time, Shop Style was being sold to a conglomerate, Rakuten, and I had moved over to Rakuten. And again, I was really enjoying my role. There was no need or reason to leave, but an opportunity from my previous CEO, Brian, came in, and he told me this would be a really good idea if I took this role. And it was a role for a company at the time. It was called Afterpay. And it was a payments company. I'm sure now you're familiar with them. They are now owned by Square. And anyway, long story short, you kind of see where this is going, especially if you're familiar with the industry. I was going to be basically employee number 2. I mean, I don't remember exactly what like the count, but yeah, one of the very first employees at Afterpay. And I turned it down because one, I had a little bit of PTSD from a payments project that I had done previously in my career, and it just didn't seem like I wanted to do that again. I didn't have all the information. I was definitely emotional. And this was a little over 10 years ago, right? I think it was 10 years ago. And, I just wasn't in the place that I am in today where I can make really sound decisions because I'm in a nervous system, like regulated state. I was a little bit dysregulated. There was so much going on. And I turned down the role. And of course, later on, I mean, it was pretty quick. The evolution of Afterpay happened pretty quickly. It only took, I think, 2 or 3 years for me to see that this was a rocket ship that took off and I didn't get on it. And everybody else who took those roles and took the job benefited from it, and I didn't. And you could say, yes, this was the biggest career mistake of my life. How could I have misjudged that? How could I have not taken that opportunity? How could I have not listened to Brian, who knows what he's doing, And like, how did I allow myself to just pass on this incredible opportunity? I could have so much more money right now. I could invest that money into Detox House. Like, there's so many things that go through my head of like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. How can I trust myself to make sound investment decisions after I totally blew that, And well, this is how. Let's walk through this whole process, but I'll table that for a second. But now you know that that's a big mistake that definitely was wired into my subconscious, wired into my nervous system, that impacted how much I was able to trust my decision making, which is detrimental because the number one thing that we want to do as far as nervous system health goes, as far as overall health goes, is trust. Trust in the system, trust in ourselves, trust in our experience. I talk about this so much, building trust in the body, trust that you can be in your body, trust yourself to make good decisions. A lot of times we don't do things not because we don't trust the other person, even though we may say that, we may say we don't trust them, but the reality is, the truth is, we actually don't trust ourselves. We don't trust ourselves to put up our own boundaries. We don't trust ourselves to speak up for ourselves. We just don't trust ourselves to take care of ourselves. The trust is missing. And I really want to get to a place, and I wanted to get to a place for myself, but I want us all to get to a place where we are so undoubtedly trusting in our abilities, in our ability to make good decisions, to take care of ourselves. This is definitely deeply, deeply rooted in our nervous system and in our survival patterns. Okay, so not to get like super nitty gritty about this, but I really just need to say this over and over again and define mistakes because I think it's so important. This is not a this is not a conversation about morality. This is not about what's right or wrong. Mistakes are literally those situations where you were wrong in a judgment, and that's it. They're not slips and errors of like, oh, I did something too quickly and I sent out an email too quickly. No, it's you trusted the wrong business partner because your judgment was off. You continued to date, a guy who continued to give you red flags, but because you were hopeful that something would shift. Those are things that we would deem as mistakes. Again, not a moral judgment, just I misjudged something and now I think that I failed at something. I think that was a failure, right? I could argue that you actually should have continued dating the guy with the red flags because you learned so much and it wasn't a failure. It was a beautiful experiment. He was your greatest teacher. Clearly speaking from personal experience here. But yeah, just the idea that this is a quote unquote mistake. Those are the examples, the types of examples that I want to just be clear about. Like, that's what a mistake is. So this is not this is right or wrong thing, and you're bad because you made a mistake. No, this is, again, you didn't slip up and send the wrong email. You didn't deceive somebody. You didn't manipulate somebody. You didn't intentionally harm somebody. That's different. We're not talking about that. We're talking about you genuinely thought you were doing the right thing. You thought you were making a good decision and you totally misjudged it. And now you think you're a failure. And even if you don't consciously think it, you subconsciously are wired to be scared of your own decision making. You don't trust yourself. And so basically, again, quote unquote mistakes can come from places like incomplete information. You don't have all the information yet, so you need more information. Maybe you're stressed out and you're doing things too quickly and you're just not thinking through things. Maybe you're emotional. And the biggest pieces are prior conditioning and pattern recognition shortcuts. Like, our brain is not here to make us happy, by the way. We talked about this on a previous episode, and I will continue to reiterate this in every single episode because it's one of the most foundational aspects of nervous system regulation, where you understand how your brain works and how, you have a little bit of knowledge around neuroscience, and that your brain is here to keep you efficient. And keeping you quote unquote safe is not what you think. Yes, of course, your body goes into fight or flight if you're actually in danger and running from a tiger. We're not talking about those situations. We will never rewire your brain to not feel fight or flight when you're in actual danger, because that is incredibly important to your survival. But it's everything else, because 99% of the time, you are not in actual danger. And your survival modes are kicking up. And they're, again, unconscious. They show up as you can't sleep. You can't stop ruminating over something. You can't stop thinking about something. You may not classify this as anxiety, but you feel anxious. You can't sit still. You have to distract. You have to keep moving. You again, can't sleep at night, can't sleep through the night. That is a dysregulated nervous system. That is a nervous system that is in survival mode. And 99% of the time, it's because it's telling you a story that is actually not true, but your brain is trying to keep you safe. So instead of hating on it and being like, oh, that's so messed up that my brain is doing this and it won't let me sleep. No, it's the most beautiful thing in the world. It's literally an overprotective helicopter parent. That's what it is. It's trying to keep you alive. It thinks it's doing you a favor, but it's not. It's actually exhausting you, and it's actually causing you a lot of stress, and it's actually harming your physiology in other ways. And so, one, having empathy for your cute little brain for doing that and knowing how to work around it. That's so, so important. So when we make quote unquote mistakes or misjudgments, they can be related to just old survival patterns. Like in my case, I had a really bad experience with a payments project in my career. And so when this opportunity of Afterpay came across my desk, quote unquote, I had PTSD, and I was like, no, I can't take this. But if I had known that and rewired my survival patterns away from that and understood that this is a completely different opportunity, this is a completely different situation, If I just realized that in my body, maybe I would have made a different decision. I probably would have made a different decision. But there are no mistakes in my world, right? I still feel no shame over that decision. I am so happy for the Afterpay team, like constantly rooting them on. They're an awesome team. I love everyone that ended up going to work there. And I love the experiences I've had. The experiences I've had in my career and my job because I continued on with influencer marketing are invaluable. They're helping me do what I'm doing right now for Detox House. Like, so in the end, there was never a mistake. It was perfect. It was perfectly perfect because I thought it was a mistake, because I thought it was a failure in judgment, because on paper it was. I passed up the opportunity to jump on a rocket ship and I just didn't make that money. So I deemed it as a failure. Therefore, in my nervous system, what that wired into me is I don't trust myself. I don't trust myself to make good decisions. There's also something about fearing mistakes, so then you just don't do things. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about the fear of making mistakes, because essentially that's kind of what came up for me when I thought about, wait, this quote unquote biggest career mistake of my life now makes me feel like I don't trust myself, therefore I shouldn't make big decisions in career, and now I have this fear of mistakes. So again, it's rarely about the mistake itself, because those mistakes are most of the time, not saying all of the time, but most of the time, they're pretty neutral events. Like, I didn't take a job, therefore I didn't have this new opportunity. Again, pretty neutral, but in my mind, it's like, oh my God, this is the biggest failure. It's because they are tied to the 5 human priorities. By the way, there's an entire podcast episode about the 5 human priorities and what our nervous systems are trying to protect. But it's tied to status, it's tied to belonging, it's tied to growth, it's tied to actual safety and love and the approval of others. And so if your system at any point in time in your life, but especially in your childhood, learns that if I make a mistake or if I get something wrong, then I won't be loved, or I won't belong, or I won't get approval, or, I won't be praised, or one of these 5 human priorities, like physical safety. I mean, sadly, some of us weren't physically safe when we made a mistake. If you made a mistake, and I think parenting has come a long way, but like back in the day, like, I don't know, you'd get punished and you'd get berated and you'd get shamed, and it was just not a great feeling when you did something wrong. So the feeling of like, oh my God, I'm in trouble, elicits this like crazy survival response in the body. And so it's just, yeah, it's not a good place to be as far as your nervous system goes and your survival mechanisms. And, it's all of this works together too. It's very much supported by attachment theory and shame research and developmental psychology and trauma research from people like Brené Brown, Gabor Mate. I mean, these are some of the people that have written extensively on this work. So I'm not even going to get into that because, if you are interested, I'll definitely link to their work in the show notes below. But again, because of this like fear of making a mistake, because in early childhood or somewhere along the lines, something was taken away from you when you made a mistake, whether it was your feeling of belonging, whether your feeling of love and approval, or your feeling of safety, or your feeling of freedom and autonomy, or your feeling of like the opportunity to grow, you develop this fear of making a mistake. And what comes out of that? I mean, perfectionism is one. I have a friend, Megan Bruneau. She's a therapist. She's writing a book right now on perfectionism. This is the most obvious thing that comes out of, this fear of making a mistake. The nervous system learns that if I do everything perfectly, I can avoid criticism, I can avoid rejection, I can avoid humiliation or emotional danger. So perfectionism has 0 to do with excellence, and it has everything to do with protection. And so this is like in a very extreme case of like, I don't want to make a mistake. So now I have to be perfect. I have to get everything right. So I'm going to be hyper attuned to avoiding making a mistake. So I'm not going to speak up. You can see the people in meetings, especially if if you are in a professional setting, but even in a friendly setting, if you go out to dinner. And again, some people are definitely more quiet than others. I'm not saying this at all. You can just tell when it's just somebody's nature and personality, and it's not about being loud or outspoken whatsoever, but it's about speaking your truth and being authentically you. And you can just tell when some people are afraid to even do that because they don't want to make a mistake. I'm raising my hand here. I have been there. I've been so afraid to speak up or ask questions, thinking that like my question is going to be stupid, or I'm going to sound ridiculous, or it's not going to make sense to anyone and they're going to think I'm weird. I'm not going to belong. It's threatening the feeling of belonging. So I want to avoid embarrassment. I want to avoid shame. I want to belong to this group. So I'm just not going to speak up. And that's how perfectionism can show up here. It obviously can show up in a lot of different ways, but specifically in like the making a mistake. Like, I don't want to make a mistake, so I don't want to even speak up or ask a question, and everything needs to be perfect, so I'm taking forever to do things, and because I just need to avoid being imperfect. And again, if you are somebody that's a leader and is running teams, like that is not an environment you want to create, because there will be so many bottlenecks. People will take forever to do something because it will have to be perfect before it gets presented out, before it gets delivered, because they're so terrified of getting something wrong that you just won't move fast enough. And that's not all organizations, but I think I speak from a place of like, yeah, I definitely come from, and I've worked for big corporate company, big companies before. I've worked for Microsoft, Accenture, Rakuten, but I've also been in a very startup culture. I don't care what size company you're in. If you're a perfectionist, you're still going to slow things down. So it's just definitely something to think about in our professional lives, in our personal lives. And then the other way it comes into play is when you're just totally afraid of making a decision, right? So you're in freeze, and this is analysis paralysis. You overanalyze everything because wrong decisions are dangerous. And so you research endlessly. You want so much certainty. You procrastinate. You delay commitment. I mean, this is, again, let's layer on attachment styles and layer on, attachment theory into this. And this is definitely reminiscent of somebody that's in more of the avoidant attachment, where they're very in their head. They overanalyze their research and just endlessly. You're not in your body, you're not in your heart, you're totally in your head. And it's not because you're trying to, it has nothing to do with excellence. It's protection. The key takeaway of all my episodes, by the way, is that there are protective survival mechanisms running the show underneath the hood in your subconscious that are affecting your everyday life, and you don't even know it. And you think they're not there because they're unconscious, but they are. And it's a matter of just figuring out what is it that your nervous system is trying to protect. And once you figure those out and you can build safety in the body, trust me, your life will become so much richer, fuller, more beautiful. Like, I've experienced it firsthand. But anyway, back to like indecisiveness and freeze. It's not because people are lazy. It's not because they don't want to do it. It's because taking action feels unsafe, because it's the nervous system trying to prevent future pain. Overthinking, which I have been so guilty of. Man, I am such an overthinker. I'm still working through it, and I've become so much better at it. It's been so freeing. But overthinking is self-protection. It's a strategy. It's a brilliant strategy, but it just doesn't serve us anymore when we're just like, there's certain parts of my life that just aren't moving forward, and it's because there's an overprotection here, right? There's also people pleasing. excessive advice seeking, outsourcing decisions. You're constantly asking other people what they think. You need everybody's opinions. Oh my God, I witnessed a leader one time, and I think that the idea was really well intentioned and that they wanted to make sure everybody was included and felt bought into the decisions, and they sought everyone's opinion and everyone's advice. It was so excessive and there was never any consensus, and it was too much swirl and just asking everybody's advice. And we're all looking at the leader to make a decision. That's why they're the leader. That's why we elected them. It's like, just tell us. Like, it's so, again, very well intentioned and theoretically would be very nice, but unfortunately nothing gets done and nothing moves forward. Outsourcing decisions way too much is when you don't trust your own intuition. It's, again, when you're asking your friends for what to wear, how to decorate your house, what text to send. If you continuously do that, your life is not yours. You didn't design your house. You didn't get to know the person because they didn't get to know the real you, because you didn't show up authentically because it's your friend sending the text messages. So no one really knows you. And that's okay, because you don't really want to be known, because that's too vulnerable. You will lack protection. You won't control the outcome. Your fear of rejection, your fear of not belonging, your fear of not being loved is leading the show. And if you don't show your true self, that's okay, because they're not actually rejecting you. They're rejecting your friend who sent the text message. So it's okay. Subconsciously, this is what happens. Do you really want to live your life like that? I personally don't. That's not a rich and beautiful life, I promise you. So having this difficulty in trusting your intuition is not a place we want to be. I want to get us to a place where we hear our own voice and we trust ourselves, because we know, everyone here, everyone listening has an incredible intuition. The more you access it, the more you play around with it, the stronger it gets, and the more you can listen to yourself and build a life that is so truly authentic and aligned to you. And again, as this relates to leadership, you become a better leader. People look up to you, respect you. So it's really, really important to understand where these things are coming from. So yeah, let's keep talking about the consequences of this fear of making mistakes. So there's also the avoidance of visibility or expansion, because again, you just don't want to make a mistake. It kind of relates to perfectionism. So again, there's a deeper nervous system truth to all of this entire fear of making mistakes. The body is locking up and saying will I still have status if I make a mistake? Am I bad now? Will I be rejected? Am I too much? Am I not enough? Am I still loved? Am I safe? Am I still a good leader? Will I still be here? Will they oust me? Am I actually physically safe? This is the narrative that goes through the unconscious mind, the subconscious. This is the narrative that gets played out in your nervous system, and this is what's running the show. So there's a lot of threat language when we think about oh my God, I made a mistake and now I'm so stupid. I always ruin things. I can't trust myself. What's wrong with me? Is running in the nervous system. That is not what we want. And I can say this from personal experience. This was what was running in my nervous system. And it was causing me to be distrusting of my own self. It was causing me perfectionism. I was so afraid of making a mistake. It was causing me hypervigilance, hyper-independence, doing things on my own. I actually didn't seek other people's opinions. That is the one thing I that is very common, but in my experience, it was more so the perfectionism and the hypervigilance and the overthinking everything. I had to overthink every single decision until the cows came home, until I exhausted myself. So, what do we do? How do we get ourselves out of this? How do we become comfortable with making mistakes, with quote unquote failure? How do we decouple that a mistake equals danger? How do we decouple that a mistake equals humiliation, or a mistake equals rejection, or a mistake equals abandonment? We need to cut, if you can visualize mistake equals danger, mistake equals humiliation, we need to cut that with a knife, and that no longer goes together. That no longer goes together. How do we do that? We can understand that, again, until we're blue in the face, but it will still live in our nervous system. It will still live in our body, and we'll continuously make decisions from this unconscious, subconscious nervous system survival program. So what do we do? How do we change this? I want to go back to what I said at the very beginning of this episode. The strongest teams aren't the ones that never fail. They're the ones that learn fastest, because people aren't wasting energy hiding. They're making the mistakes and they're learning from them, and they're moving on. They're not freezing. They're not overthinking. They're not perfectionists. They're not hyper independent. They're working together. They're not afraid of continuing on because of one very important thing that we need to do as just individuals, but also, again, if you're a leader listening to this is something to think about with your teams too. But individually, we need to build psychological safety. We need to understand that it is safe to trust ourselves. It is safe to make decisions. And so what do we need to do? We need to take the shame out of it. So if shame destroys learning in teams, shame also destroys learning inside of ourselves. So first, we need to take the shame out. So if you have any shame over any decisions you've made, any mistakes that you've made, and again, we can talk about the manipulation, deception, and intentional harm and all of that in a different episode. We're not talking about that right now. We are talking about, you thought you were doing the right thing. I thought I was making the right decision by turning down the job. I thought I was making the right decision by continuing to date X person. I thought I was making the right decision by not being friends with somebody. And then I learned that I made the wrong decision. That the person I decided not to be friends with ended up being wonderful and fantastic. That the person that I decided to keep dating ended up not being the right partner for me. That the job that I ended up not taking ended up being a rocket ship and I could have made millions of dollars and I didn't. And none of these things are bad, and my decisions weren't failures because they were all beautiful learning experiences, and there is zero shame. So how do we start building psychological safety in the body? This is the key. This is the crux of this episode. This is how we're going to do it, because we can't. First of all, affirmations don't work. You can stare at yourself in the mirror and say, I make good decisions. I make good decisions. I make good decisions until the cows come home and your body and your nervous system still won't believe it. You have to do the body work. You have to do the subconscious reprogramming work. And so I'll talk to you a little bit about how we're going to get there. The biggest thing, I talk about this a lot in my other episodes too, but building identity around things is really dangerous. You want to check yourself for the identities that you've built. And especially with decisions, you want to separate identity from outcome. So if something didn't work, it has nothing to do with you. Instead of saying, I'm a failure, you can just say, that decision didn't work. That was a bad decision. Not, I'm a bad decision maker. No, separate yourself from the fact. The fact is, first of all, it's just your opinion, by the way. Another person's opinion may be like, no, you should have kept dating that guy. No, you shouldn't have taken that job. You should have stuck with influencer marketing because that's your expertise and you've built a career in influencer marketing for the last 15 years and now you're an expert. Changing industries is not a good idea. So first of all, it's an opinion, but more importantly, separate it from the fact. I'm not a failure. that was a bad decision. Fact, not I made a bad decision, but that was a bad decision. Just that language alone will definitely help decouple some of these belief systems in the body. And then we want to build nervous system recovering capacity. So this is what I do in the state shift. This is, again, we want to get out of our heads and into our bodies. So we do breath work. I also guide people in cold plunges. Anything that helps regulate the body in a more like strained, stressful situation will help build emotional resilience. Resilient people are not people that never get activated. That is not what nervous system healing is. It's not about feeling calm. It's about getting flexible. They're people who know how to recover. It's about recovery. It's about flexibility. It's about that bounce back rate. And so you just want to build that in the body. And that is something that we focus on deeply in the state shift. We do that over the course of a few weeks because it's so important to build trust in your body. When we do breath holds and breath work, those breath holds are incredible opportunities to just witness that you can trust your body, that it has all the oxygen it needs. In a cold plunge, you can literally, like in real time, your brain is like getting proof in real time that you can handle discomfort. And you're just staring at yourself like, I'm literally sitting in 50-degree water and it's freezing and I'm doing it and I'm breathing and I'm registering to my brain that I am okay in discomfort. It builds so much resilience. It builds so much capacity. And so breath work, cold exposure are two of my favorite ways to do this. Then we want to also allow safe exposure to uncertainty. So confidence comes from taking action. Confidence comes from actually like going out there and like living life. You can talk about riding a horse all you want. You can study it. You can know everything about it, but you will never be confident unless you go outside, put on your boots, and get on the horse and finally ride it. This is where coaching is so important. We can't do this alone. It's so hard to take these actions when we're afraid and when we don't trust ourselves. We need somebody rooting us on. We need somebody who sees our blind spots, and we need somebody to also just double check like, hey, is this safe when you're just starting out, until you get to a place where you're like, no, I feel good about this. But coaching is really critical here. And again, it's about going out there and doing the thing. And if it's helpful, start with really small decisions, like what kind of latte you order, whether or not you want vanilla or honey in it, whatever it is. And if it tastes good, then start to say, that was a really good decision. If it doesn't, go back and ask for something to make it better, like until you feel good about speaking up, making decisions for yourself. Keep going. It doesn't have to be such a big decision around like taking a crazy new job offer. It could be something so small as like, I bought this piece of, this is big, furniture is expensive, but like I bought a piece of furniture and it looks great in the house. Great, I made a good decision. Or I ordered this on the menu and it was really delicious. I made a really good ordering decision. The more you can clock and give your brain proof of how you make good decisions, and it has to be real. Again, you can't just like stare in the mirror and be like, I make good decisions. I make good decisions. Like your brain is just going to be like, I'm sorry, I don't believe that. That's BS. You have to give it real proof. You have to believe it. So you have to really believe that it is a good decision. So if you got a latte and you hate it and you're like, this was so good, I made a good decision. Like, again, no, that's not going to work. You can't lie to yourself and you can't trick your brain. Your brain needs proof. So slowly start proving to your brain that you make really good decisions. And practice repair instead of self-abandonment. If you did end up making a quote-unquote mistake, something that you think is a failure, guess what? It's part of the human experience to fail, to make mistakes. Don't identify yourself with the thing. Again, that's what I do feel like a lot of really successful people and strong leaders and strong teams do. They don't over-identify themselves with whatever the thing is. They launch a product and it fails. They don't sit there and says, nobody wants what I'm making. Nobody wants what I made. No, they just said, okay, that failed. That product didn't work. The product has nothing to do with you. Decouple it and stay with yourself after the failure. Accountability without shame. Take accountability for it. Just say, hey, you know what? That launch was a mistake. I didn't do it the right way. Next time, I'll do it this way. And it's not me. It's like, I'm not over-identifying myself with the mistake. It's like that didn't work. That product launch didn't work. It has nothing to do with me. Self-trust is not believing you'll never fail again because, again, hi, welcome to the human experience. It's being able to trust yourself in the process and knowing that you won't abandon yourself if you do. Trusting yourself that you can handle discomfort. You can learn from your mistakes. You don't need to be identified by them. It doesn't mean anything about love or belonging or status or your freedom and autonomy or your growth. Tell your body a different story. We really do a lot of this in the State Shift, so I highly recommend you check it out. But if you want some free integration tools, I have some free tools in the show notes here. If you're not ready for the full transformation and you just want to explore some work from Detox House, I'll share some really helpful links below. And I hope this episode was helpful for you. I feel like it was very helpful for me just to talk some of these things out. And, again, I want to reiterate that mistakes are a part of being human, but losing yourself after a mistake doesn't have to be. You're allowed to learn without shame. This is what we're here for. You're allowed to recalibrate without collapsing your identity. You're allowed to become wiser. That's how we become wiser, is learning through these things without becoming fearful. Don't let the pendulum swing into the fearful side where you, again, become paralyzed by perfectionism and hyper-independence and all these things that we talked about. Like, real self-trust isn't believing you'll always choose perfectly, because we won't. But it's really allowing yourself to trust in this experience that is life and trust yourself through it. I promise you are okay. So to close us out, I just want to package this up in a pretty little bow of like, what does somebody who's regulated and doesn't get thrown off by mistakes look like in detail? So number one, they separate outcome from identity. I made a bad decision, therefore I am bad, stupid, and broken does not exist in their mind. They don't think that way. They think more like, that didn't work. I do that differently next time. I learned something new. The mistake becomes data. It doesn't become self-hatred. Okay, so number two, they recover really quickly. So I talked about this is about recovery. This is why we do breath work and cold plunge. It's to build that resilience so that we don't stay stuck and we don't spiral. So they don't stay in rumination. They don't stay in shame loops. They don't stay catastrophizing or overthinking. They move through. So it's not complete avoidance of it, by the way. This is very important, very key. They reflect, they process it, and they recalibrate pretty quickly. So self-trusting people, people who trust themselves, don't avoid their pain. They don't avoid their feeling. No, they just avoid building an identity around it. They become the observer, which is, again, a lot of what we do in the State Shift. They stay curious versus defensive. I can't tell you how many times I would get so defensive when my mom, specifically my mother, would point out a mistake that I made. And now I don't do that anymore with her. I definitely own it and I lean into it. And I have so much compassion and empathy for the girl who was defensive, because I understand exactly what she was trying to protect and why. The feeling of love, approval, belonging, all of that. Like, I totally understand it. But now I just don't do that anymore. I'm so curious. I lean in and I'm like, what did I miss? What was I ignoring? What can this teach me? Oh my God, I did make a mistake. Oh, I did think that was the opposite, because again, I don't over-identify with it. It really is so freeing. And by the way, it has made my relationship with my mother so much better. So even just this work will have a ripple effect on your relationships. So next, they don't outsource all future decisions after one bad outcome. So again, it's not like this fear kicks in, right? This pendulum swings the complete opposite direction, where if you make a mistake, you then begin to choose things. You have an inability to choose. You have a fear of your own intuition. You are constantly seeking other people's advice. You're like, well, I don't trust myself, so you tell me which color I should pick. You know what I mean? They don't do that. One incorrect judgment does not invalidate your ability to judge things. That's a mature nervous system. That's resilience. And they also allow themselves to be imperfect publicly. So this is definitely deeply connected to psychological safety, and this goes along with that Harvard Business School study on psychological safety and really high-performing teams. Admitting mistakes publicly is like outing your shadow. This is like shadow work. When people talk about shadow work, this is kind of what that means. It's like being able to kind of poke fun at yourself, because again, you're not over-identifying with it, and you're not afraid of losing status. You're not afraid of losing belonging. You're not afraid of losing love and approval. You're just not, because your worth is not dependent on it. Your worth is not dependent on it. It's not dependent on the external validation, and it's not dependent on appearing flawless. You know that owning your mistakes makes you more relatable, makes you more human, makes people like you more. It actually fosters more belonging. You have no fear of just owning it. And that reduces so much internal pressure. Talk about emotional release. Talk about reducing that pressure. All right. They also remain so connected to self during failure. So again, they don't self-talk, like they don't shame themselves. They don't numb out, they don't isolate, they don't distract. They're connected to their bodies. They understand, okay, here's the mistake I made. Here's the misjudgment. Here's why. I understand why I did that. I have so much empathy for myself for doing that. And now I know I'll do differently next time. This is more data. They feel their feelings. If they feel disappointed in themselves, they'll just, take 5 minutes to feel what that feels like and move on. They'll let it out of their body. If they feel something like, oh, I wish I had done that differently, they'll feel it, but they'll remind themselves that, like, I can handle this. I can learn from this. I have a steadiness. They're in such connection with their body, and that allows them to continue taking risks. And it's not reckless, and it's not uninformed risk. It's, again, that previous mistake gave me more data, so the risks I take in the future will be more informed, and I'll be more connected with my body, more connected with my intuition, more connected with my authenticity, and I will be able to keep making decisions and keep learning because I trust myself and I trust my experience, and I trust my ability to recover more than my ability to predict. I get it. We all want certainty. We all want to be able to predict everything. I mean, if we could, how amazing that would, well, kind of be boring, no? Like, if you knew everything and everything was certain, how boring would life be? The point is not to trust in your ability to predict. I think this is a big nuance. It's not about like, oh, I can predict the future. I am so intuitive that I can predict the future, and I can predict what will go wrong, and I can predict that this will happen. That's not it. What is it is I can predict that I can recover, that I can trust myself. It's not about guaranteeing the right outcome. It's about being able to ride the wave even when the wave is bigger than you thought, or smaller, or something happens, something unexpected happens, and you trust yourself to be able to ride it. That is the key. That's it right there. That self-trust. It's not about control. It's not about predicting all and like planning and like knowing everything will be okay. It's trusting that no matter what, you will be okay. And I promise that for you, that no matter what, you'll be okay. And I think that's a perfect place to end. All right, y'all. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I will see you on the next one.